This is Here I Am, Batson and the Batsons by SmolSpideyBoi. Rating, teen and up. Summary. Billy takes out a demonic sorceress that escaped from Tartarus, gets hurt, passes out, and meets yet another bat. There were quite a few things that bothered Tim and got on his nerves. Sweaty-smelling suits, bad coffee, although he still drank it, interrupting, people invading his bubble, getting blamed for something he didn't do, grapple lines getting tangled in midair, ads popping up on his computer while he was working on a case, slow walkers, Jason replacing his toothpaste with hair gel, being ignored, etc. The list goes on. But one of Tim's biggest pet peeves was villain sorcerers. Red Robin was thrown into a brick wall, chipping some of the bricks and significantly bruising the vigilante's back. The team proceeded to get up with a groan and reached out to grab his staff, but it was kicked out of reach by the villain. She was fucking irritating. The sorcerer was new. They hadn't encountered her before, and she knew it. She was smug, believing that she was probably more powerful than the majority of the League, and wasn't afraid to show it. She wore a long, black coat-like jacket that had hundreds of little charms dangling off of chains. She actually could have passed for a normal human if it weren't for the black skin with the glowing star-like freckles, white hair that defied gravity and seemed to twist and flow even in the absence of wind, long silver claw-like nails, and vibrant purple eyes. Yeah, a normal human. She giggled as she saw the hero crumpled before her. "Aw, is the little birdie too exhausted to play? What a shame, I was having fun," she purred, blasting Red Robin with a shockwave of pain. He doubled over and gagged, unable to draw any air into his lungs. As soon as his head cleared and he could breathe, Tim wished for a miracle to happen so they could all go home unscathed and alive. The rest of the bats had either been knocked out or were too injured to continue. Since none of them had any magical ability or any protections against magic, it was embarrassing to say that the sorceress had taken them all by surprise. One of the cons of being an entirely human team. Tim looked at Jason, a couple of feet away. His helmet cracked and a gun resting listlessly in his hands, the bullet still inside of it. He looked at Damien, wrapped up in a cage of metal and muzzled with a metal plate. His cape was torn and his mask scorched. He looked at Cass, unconscious on the ground, with cuts littering her body. And finally, he looked at Bruce, standing in the corner gripping his dislocated shoulder and speaking into the League comm. They were going to need some help here. Tim groaned, realizing that this probably wasn't going to end well for anyone. The witch turned around, having finished dealing with Red Robin, and once she saw Batman talking into the comm, her eyes narrowed and an exasperated smile graced her lips. "Well, hey, we can't have any of that now, can we?" Violet ribbons of light began dancing around her fingertips as she began to focus on the dark night. Claws gleaming, bloodlust in her eyes, and power sparking all over her. Tim yelled out to Bruce. He yelled for him to move, to run, to just do something, do anything. But the Bat of Gotham stood tall where he was. The sorceress descended upon Bruce, murderous intent gleaming in her eyes. She began to chant, words that sounded more like screams than actual words, making their way from her lips until a blinding white light burned away the darkness. Tim shielded his eyes from the light, but once it dimmed, he cracked them open to see a familiar hero standing in front of Batman. One that wore a red suit, white and gold cape, and was known better as Captain Marvel. His eyes glowing a bright blue-white to rival the sorceress's sickly purple. She had landed with a painful smack on the cement floor. When she got up, Tim saw that blood ran down her face. She snarled at the sight of the champion of magic and the protector of the mortal realm. His face was an impassive facade of stony determination, which didn't fit his person at all and scared Tim if he was being honest, and lightning flickered in his hands. The captain launched himself at the villain, swiftly sending a punch into her gut. "This isn't your realm," he shouted at her as she tried to regain her breath. "Go back to where you belong." "No!" she screeched at him as she used her claws to try to strike the hero. But Marvel kept flying out of her reach. She managed to scratch his face, just below his eye, and yet the demigod refused to be deterred by it. She continued using her talons, trying to find some way to injure the champion. However, Marvel kept dodging her strikes and sending his own, making the witch growl in frustration when he sped away behind her. Having enough, she struck out with her magic, emitting a wave of purple light and disorienting the captain. She took her chance, and before Marvel could do anything to stop her, she dug her claws into his stomach. Marvel stared in surprise. He glanced down in shock, and the witch smirked in triumph. She had struck a blow against the strongest sorcerer in the realm, and she loved it. She twisted her hands, causing an excruciating sensation to run up his spine. But the demonic sorceress was stunned when the champion looked up at her, eyes glowing a bright red, and a snarl on his face. She stared dumbfounded as he gripped her arm and threw her over his shoulder onto the asphalt. Before she could react, struck her with the living lightning that had gathered from his hands and lived in his eyes. Ego, O Captain Marvel, champion of magic, Kai protector of the mortal realm, apoioredo aftoplasmus sphira apo opo ithre, apo to rock of eternity as to canume, he intoned, swirling a dark hole bursting from his palms, consuming the light around them. 100 voices seemed to speak with Marvel, the reverb affecting the sorceress, blood leaking from her eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Afiste ton nagayinai, he intoned, the swirling mass of tentacles and darkness consuming the sorceress. Once the portal had closed, Marvel fell to his knees, the light fading from his eyes and the reek of ozone leaving the air. Legs shaking, Captain Marvel stood and pressed his palms against his abdomen, light bubbling out from in between his fingers. He dismissed Batman when he went over there to investigate. I will heal soon, he intoned in the 100 voices voice. That creature was not of this world. Somehow she escaped from Tartarus and made her way here. With those final words, the demigod turned and departed in another burst of light. Tim stood up shakily, leaning on his bowstaff. Hey, B, what the fuck just happened? Shouldn't we be following him? Bruce shook his head. No, if he wanted help, he would have asked. Bruce leaned against the wall, setting his shoulder with a sickening snap. He picked up Damien, who was curled up on the ground, unconscious from blood loss and insufficient airflow from the muzzle. Go help Jason and Cass. We will discuss this later. Tim glanced back in the direction Cap had gone, worry tumbling in his gut, but he suppressed it and shuffled over to Jason. He'll have to worry about the Cap later. The next 2 days were full of aching muscles and replacing bandages. Tim was the only one who wasn't hurt too badly by the sorceress, which of course meant that he was the only one who could go on patrol. It was just fucking peachy, not like he already worked longer than all of the others. It's not like he had shit to do or a life to live. So, Tim was in the middle of the city at midnight, hunched over on a rooftop, waiting for the cold wind to subside. But it didn't, seeing as how Tim groaned as the wind grew stronger. If only he could wear sweaters on patrol. Maybe he could order a bunch of sweatshirts designed after their suits. That way they could wear them when it was cold out and still be in uniform, in a sense. Tim scoffed, as if Bruce would wear a Batman-themed sweater. He hopped off the roof and rolled onto the next one, taking off at a nicely paced jog and jumping over obstacles when necessary. His cape flapped behind him, and his hair kept falling into his eyes, which meant he was brushing it out of his face every 3 seconds. Sometimes having long hair was annoying. Red Robin had just leaped into a fire escape when he heard it. Whimpers and soft sobs. If he hadn't been trained by Batman, Tim doubted he would have normally heard it. The vigilante crouched down on the cold metal and listened. He concentrated on the sounds and tried to find where it was coming from. He dropped onto the pavement below, a back alley behind the soup kitchen, and listened carefully for the source. Tim heard a moan of pain, and his head whipped around. It was coming from behind a dumpster and some trash bags. Without hesitating, he hurried over and moved the trash out of the way to find a kid. Tim looked at the child and felt his heart clench. He couldn't have been older than 10 years old, and here he was sleeping on top of the trash, in a ratty red sweater that Tim doubted offered any warmth, and moaning in pain. Even asleep, the kid was clutching his stomach and crying, soft sobs permeating the silence. Tim glanced around, trying to see if there was anyone around here, but upon reaching no one, he turned back to the kid. Red knew that he wasn't safe here. This was Gotham of all places. No kid would be safe here on his own. Making up his mind, Tim tried to shake the boy awake, but the kid didn't wake up, not even an eyelid flutter or a hitched breath. He continued to softly sob in pain and curl in on himself. It was like Tim wasn't here at all. Red looked at the alley again. He was starting to feel vulnerable here. If a gang or some criminals came upon Red Robin alone in an alley with no positional advantages next to a defenseless kid, it would be like Christmas to them. He couldn't stay here, and neither could the kid. Sighing in advance for his sore arms, Tim bent down and picked up the kid, eyes widening in shock as he found out that he was practically skin and bones and weighed next to nothing. He also noticed how the kid had a cut right below his eye, a nasty one too. That must have hurt. The teen grabbed at his grapple gun, and together he and the kid shot upward towards the roof, safe from the dangers below. Tim set him down on the roof, but the child didn't react at all to the new scenery. He still shivered, and still groaned, and still clutched his midriff. Red Robin sighed in disappointment. Then, all of a sudden, a strong gust of wind flew by, causing Tim to wrap his cloak around him. But then he looked at the kid. I'm going to end up regretting this, Tim thought, slipping off his cape and wrapping it around the kid, treating it like a blanket. He made sure it was snug and fully wrapped around him. It only took a minute for him to notice the drastic change in the boy. Once he was covered up and got warm enough, he stopped shivering and relaxed. Tim let out a small breath of relief and sat down next to the kid. If he couldn't have his cape, then he could at least use the kid as a windblock. And yeah, that was probably mean and thoughtless, but hey, it was cold. He glanced at the boy again and wondered about what he should do. He couldn't bring him back to the cave. But the cave was only for emergencies and superheroes, and this definitely wasn't an emergency. Or a superhero. Another option was to drop him off at the nearest hospital. That would be the smart thing to do. But from the looks of it, this kid was homeless and didn't have anywhere to go. And if he was homeless, then there had to be a good reason as to why a 10-year-old was out here. Maybe he ran away from abusive parents. Maybe he was abandoned. Those were the most likely situations. And if those were the answers, then he probably wouldn't want to be found by those who hurt him. Then the last option would be Tim waiting until he woke up. Well, at least he'll be resting for the time being. So, Tim settled down and waited for the mysterious raven-haired boy to wake up. Maybe a nap would be nice? That sounded very appealing to the vigilante at the moment. So, with a final look at the kid, the teen rested his head against the stone and closed his eyes. It took way longer than he would have expected, for when he did wake up, it was nearing 4 a.m. The kid had long stopped whimpering and shivering, thanks to the makeshift blanket, and had begun to wake up. Billy cracked open his soft blue eyes and looked around blearily. He rubbed away the crusty sand from his eyes, making a mental note to thank Hypnos for the sleep, and studied wherever he was. Billy smacked his lips, wrinkling his nose at the taste of dry mouth, and noticed that he was not where he had passed out. The fight with the she-beast had really done a number on Billy. The strike he had endured to his stomach had not been good, to put it lightly, and if it wasn't for the wisdom of Solomon telling him to sleep, Billy figured he'd be dead by now. The injury had done more magically than physically. It had drained most of the demigod's magic and energy, causing him to hibernate to regain it again. The blast of lightning he had used on the witch was the last he had left, and once she was expelled back into her dark realm, Cap had to get out of there fast and begin his hibernation before he passed out. Billy had barely said the magic word in time before he fainted on top of the garbage bags, falling into a fitful sleep. And now that he was awake, he could only assume that he had enough energy and magic to join the land of the living again. That was a close one, Billy thought as he rubbed his eyes. Letting out a big yawn, the young magic user slipped underneath the warm blanket once more. Billy's eyebrows drew together in confusion. He was far away from Fawcett at the moment, so he highly doubted he had his red blanket on him. And he was pretty sure that he was still outside if the dew in his hair was anything to go by. The boy opened his eyes again, and was pleasantly surprised to find a big blanket on top of him. But it was unlike any blanket he had ever seen before. For one, it wasn't like normal blanket material. It was too rubbery and stiff for that. And another thing, it had these weird feather designs on it. Billy continued to look at the blanket curiously when all of a sudden he heard a snore next to him. He jolted and spun his head around. Stunned to find that there was a teenager next to him, one who was wearing a strangely familiar suit and a red mask. "Holy moly," he whispered so he didn't wake up Red Robin. Billy looked at his blanket again and realized that it wasn't that, but it was in fact the cape that Red wore with his suit. Then the realization suddenly hit Billy. Red Robin had found him. Red Robin had found him. Red Robin had taken him somewhere safe. Red Robin had given him his cape. And Red Robin was snoring and drooling right next to him. Billy gulped and covered his mouth, trying to stifle a giggle as he watched the infamous vigilante drool in his sleep. Billy knew that Red Robin was known for being tired all the time, but he just didn't think that he'd see it in person. Not wanting to wake him up, Billy started to stand, pulling the cloak off of him and leaving it beside Red's so that when he did wake up, he would find it still there. The raven let out a breath, thinking that he successfully arose from the ground without waking up one of the vigilantes of Gotham, but he should have known. This was one of the bats. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Red Robin said behind Billy. The boy froze and turned around slowly, seeing that the teen was standing up, already pulling the cloak back into his suit. "It's good to see that you're awake, by the way. I was worried." The teen let out a big yawn and shook his head, trying to get rid of the clouds in his mind that came with sleep. Billy began. "I was just going to leave, Mr. Red Robin. I didn't want to bother you." Red shook his head and yawned again. I'm not gonna find a kid injured whimpering in the middle of the night, make sure that he's safe, and wait for him to wake up, only to have him skip out on me." He shook his head again. Billy figured that he must have been really tired last night. "No, I'm not doing that," Billy said in his defense. "Well, then what were you doing?" Billy shrugged and looked down. "I don't know. I just didn't want to bother you. You seemed fine enough. I just thought I'd leave you alone." Red was silent for a moment before he exhaled. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You want to get something to eat?" he asked all of a sudden. Billy looked up in surprise. "What?" The teen gestured vaguely. "Well, I'm hungry. I'm guessing you're hungry. Want to get something to eat? I know this great falafel stand." Billy gazed at the hero, confused. He was definitely the strangest teen hero he had ever met. It had been a while since he last ate, if he was to go by how much his stomach hurt, although that was probably just the last of his injuries healing. Either way, he could eat. Sure?" he said. Red nodded. "Great, let's go." Eating falafel with the member of the Bat family at 4 in the morning was certainly a new experience for Billy, one that he knew he wouldn't forget for a long time. Because not only did Red Robin have a wallet on him and pay for the boy's meal, but he was also a regular at the stand. Apparently, late-night falafel runs were a thing for the Bats of Gotham. Also coffee runs, because the Starbucks across the street knew Red too, and already had his cup on standby when he walked through the doors. This was a whole new level of superhero for Billy. Maybe he could do the same thing as Marvel? It would be nice to have a cup of coffee when he was really tired after patrol. But in order to do that, Cap would have to have money, and therefore Billy would have to have money. At least it was a nice thought. The champion munched on his falafel and pita bread happily, thankful that he was getting food in his stomach. It was the second time in the last couple of weeks where someone had bought him food. The Lady Taish must have blessed him or something. Red came back to their table, chugging down the coffee he ordered, and sat down with a thump. "So," Red began, "what happened to you? I don't usually come across a ton of injured kids shivering next to a dumpster." Billy's breath hitched. What should he say? He couldn't tell Red the truth, but it was a good thing half-truths were his forte. "I got hurt, so I ran away. I couldn't be in that place anymore," he answered vaguely. "What place? Your home?" "Sure, let's go with that." Red Robin narrowed his eyes behind the mask and took a sip of coffee. He knew that the kid was lying. It was obvious, but he'll let it go for now. If the kid didn't want to tell him, then he didn't have to tell him. But on another note, "What's your name?" The kid swallowed his falafel. "I'm Billy," he said as he stuck out his hand for Red to shake. Tim did him the honors and shook it. "No last name?" Red inquired. Billy smirked. "No, I do have a last name. I'm just not going to say it." Tim's eyebrows went up. Man, this kid did not trust people. He wondered what could have happened in his life that would make him act this way. He kind of reminded Tim of Jason, in a sense. Sure, he was nicer than the Hood, but the hostility and wariness still lingered in the undertone. It was the kind of thing only a street kid could develop. "All right, then, keep your secrets," Red smirked. Billy stifled a giggle behind his hand. "Did you just quote a meme?" Red nodded, stifling his own laughter. "Well then, Billy, do you have anywhere to go? I kinda don't want to leave you all by yourself." Billy finished the last of his meal and looked up at the vigilante. "I'll be fine. I'm just gonna go home after this." "But I thought you said you didn't want to be home?" No, I said place. So you didn't mean your home? Nope. But then where's the place? I'm not saying. Well, why not? Because it's just a place. So, then where's home? I'm happy to walk you there. Nah, it'll be fine. You sure? Gotham's pretty dangerous. Well, so am I, Billy retorted faster than a whip before his eyes widened in shock at what he just said. He covered his mouth and looked down, suddenly finding the table very interesting. Fred leaned forward on the table. What? He said. Nothing, Billy mumbled quickly. The Raven gathered up his garbage and quickly walked over to the trash can, leaving Red Robin behind. Billy was appalled by what he had said. He was usually so careful. The boy shook his head. It had to be the hibernation. Yeah, that was it. He was just so tired and out of it that his guards went down, and he slipped up. Plus, it was Red Robin, a fellow hero. That sounded right, didn't it? But that was all that Billy said as he turned around. Thanks for the help, and thanks for the falafel. A sudden wave of déjà vu washed over the boy. This was just like what had happened with Dick. Red was looking at the boy curiously, wondering about what he meant by, so am I. Could this kid be a metahuman? It would make sense. Homeless metas weren't unheard of. But before Tim got a chance to ask, Billy slipped out of the Starbucks and ran into the twilight morning, leaving behind an intrigued Bat and an empty seat. As Tim thought about this strange night, a question suddenly surfaced in his mind. When did the cut below his eye heal? This was Chapter 2 of Here I Am, Batson and the Batsons. If you liked this, let me know in the comments. And if you have any suggestions for other stories I could read, let me know and I'll see what I could do. Thanks for listening.